We're talking WSU football with Alex Brink, and we've reached the final week of the regular season. The Cougs at home to close out the regular season campaign, hosting Oregon State. Alex, first question. It feels like we were just starting fall camp, and in the blink of an eye, here we are at the end of the season. Does it ever seem like a season takes as long as it does, or does it always quick for you?
No, it's always quick. I was gonna say it's kind of the nature of football, right? Is it feels like it's a hurry up and wait until the season starts, and then it's just a blur, right? And then you're done with it. And it's crazy to think that, we were thinking about kicking off against Idaho in at Giesa Field, and that was 3 months ago, and now you're on to the last game.
Yeah, and Cougar hoping it's not their last game of the season because, of
Sure.
course, the big topic. This is essentially a playoff game. If you win, you get to keep playing. If you lose, your season's done. Cougars one win away from securing bowl eligibility. Talking to head coach Jimmy Rogers all week, he mentioned how vital that would be and how much he wants for these upperclassmen to not only get to play in one more game, but you think that's probably roughly another whole month of practice. And I think, Alex, we talk about this team. It's so senior laden. There's so many upperclassmen in this class that it'd be really cool to see the Cougs get a win against the Beavers, which would mean one more game and a little bit more time in a Cougar uniform for that class.
Yeah, I think it's a big moment for Jimmy Rogers and this entire staff, right? It's a chance, like you said, to kind of get these players focused on something that's really important during a season where things maybe haven't gone quite the way you would have hoped. But that doesn't mean there's not still a lot on the table, right? And so as a coach, that's kind of your biggest challenge is how do you keep people motivated right through the ups and downs. And then when you're presented with an opportunity that really means something, are you able to execute? And I think that's what this is, a game that they by all rights should win. They have everything to play for. Oregon State really does not. And, I think Washington State, the opportunity to play in a bowl game means a lot, right? Like the extra practices matters. The opportunity to be together as a team as you head towards the transfer portal opening matters. The kind of national prominence of just being in a bowl game, no matter what your record is, matters. When you think about recruiting, and so yeah, I think for the Cougs, this game means a lot. Rarely do I say it's kind of a must win, but ultimately I think this is a must win in year one of Jimmy Rogers to really springboard them into year two.
I think it's important that you mention national prominence, not to plug somebody else's work, but I was listening to Scott Van Pelt podcast over the weekend, and as they were recapping, the week of college football action, he pointed out James Madison, of course, getting the win over Washington State, but he really gave credit to WSU because they have been in that national conversation. They were right there with Ole Miss. They were right there with Virginia. They were right there with James Madison. And so, I think that the college football audience is kind of intelligent enough now to look past that record, that wins and loss, and realize if a team plays hard, and that was something that Jimmy Rogers said this week. He said, you can turn on the tape and see that we play hard. It's not like they're just loafing around in these games that have come out on the short side. That's a bit of a non sequitur. I just wanted to, I guess, shout out SVP and Stanford Steve. But as we talk about this week, it's all about the seniors this week, and there's so many seniors on this roster that we don't have time to go through all of them. But just as I think something that's so cool and such a underrated storyline of this first season, Alex, is the upperclassmen that came with Jimmy from South Dakota State and the upperclassmen that were here in Pullman already, and how they have kind of blended together to kind of come under the umbrella of playing for one team. And I just wonder how you've observed that. Obviously, you get a different look. You get to talk to these guys, and what's that like to see essentially two separate teams come together, and suit up for the Cougs this year?
Yeah, in general, it's kind of a hard thing, right? You have, players from, like you mentioned, two different teams that are really, high level players, veterans, that walk into the same locker room. And, the guys that are coming from South Dakota State, they got to kind of prove themselves and earn the respect of the guys that are here. The guys that are here, want to show that, hey, like we've been doing this at a high level for a long time. And, that can go one of two ways, right? You can earn mutual respect with each other, or it can kind of become a place where you're constantly butting heads or the competition spills into animosity. And I think this team really threaded that needle of finding out how to play together and gel, particularly on the defensive side of the football, where you had in my opinion, a lot of high level players that were left over on the roster, and then a lot of high level players that came from South Dakota State, and they've really gelled together to be one of the best units in the country. That's a credit to the coaching staff probably, but also the athletes that are mature enough to handle that. It's also, refreshing in this age of college football that this is probably going to be, to some degree the new normal moving forward. And so for Washington State, which is a program that will probably experience high turnover in general, having a coaching staff and having a culture where you can get those pieces of the puzzle to fit, I think is really important.
Absolutely. And like I mentioned, we can't talk about every single senior on this class. I think there's 24, 25. But if there's one we're going to talk about, it makes sense to talk about the quarterback since we're talking to a Cougar legend at quarterback. Zevi Eckhouse, I think this last game against James Madison, you saw why you stick with Zevi Eckhouse. He makes an interception that is probably a throw he forced, but then he comes back and he scores a touchdown with his legs that I don't think any other quarterback on the Cougar roster could make on a play that breaks down, and he's just able to make a play. Obviously, one more performance, hopefully two more performances for him in a Cougar uniform. We know what he did in the Cougars bowl game last year, but now as we look kind of under the umbrella of his tenure as the starting quarterback this season, Alex, what's maybe one or two takeaways you've taken from Zevi's play ever since taking the reins as starting QB?
I think the biggest thing is that he provided a spark at a time in this season when the Cougs desperately needed it, right? Because there was some uncertainty with Jackson Potter being the starter out of training camp, and after that North Texas game, it really felt very deflating, and not that it was Jackson Potter's fault, just the situation, right? Because nobody knew really why Zeviak House wasn't named the starter out of camp, and Jackson Potter had his ups and downs. And so it just felt like the team in general could have gone one of two directions, right? They could have kind of folded for sure after that North Texas game. Instead, they showed a lot of resilience, and I think a lot of that is a credit to Zebi Ekas, who came in and played well for 3 quarters against UW before it kind of got off the rails a little bit. Got the win at Colorado State. Really steadied the ship, and I think Zebi's a veteran player. He's seen a lot of football. He was a backup to John Mateer. I'm sure that's not the place he wanted to be when he came to Washington State. He's really earned this opportunity, and I credit him for kind of sticking with it, through all the ups and downs, and being a guy that it feels like this team really trusts.
I think it'd be super cool to have a full circle moment if the Cougars get this win and they play in a bowl game, and that was kind of our introduction to Zevi as a
Sure,
quarterback, last year's bowl game.
sure.
But to do that, the Cougars got to beat the Beavs, which they were unable to do in Corvallis in the first of the two meetings between these Pac-12 opponents this year. We don't need to go blow by blow in that Oregon State game at Corvallis, Alex. But if there was one takeaway, one reason you would say, quote unquote, that the Cougars weren't able to come out on top in that game, what do you remember it being?
Well, I mean, offensive production was probably the main thing, and some of that showed up against James Madison as well. In that, Washington State's statistically really good in red zone percentage, like they score a lot in the red zone, but that accounts for field goals also. And what you saw against James Madison is you kick a field goal after you score or after a big interception right to start the game by the defense, and I think not getting touchdowns in the red zone really hurts you. Against Oregon State a few weeks ago, right? You had the interception by Zeviak House in the red zone, where you take points away. And I just think ultimately this game's kind of a race to 21 points. Whoever gets to 21 points is probably going to win it. The defense for Washington State's playing so well in general. They just need a little help, right? They need to feel like they're playing with a lead instead of feel like they're kind of playing with like a one possession. They can't give up any big plays at all. So I'd like to see that offensive production increase, and a lot of that has to do with red zone touchdowns versus like red zone field goals, let's say.
I think maybe kind of wrapping up here, we're talking about senior day, senior week. Obviously, there's so many emotions that go into that. And you know that all those seniors are going to be playing with that high level emotion. And I just wanted to ask you, when there was a game that had like a lot of emotions around it, whether it was the Apple Cup, we know your history with that, whether it was senior week when it was your time, How do you as a football player, channel those emotions into the right way, not let the moment swallow you up and just try and take all those feelings that you're feeling that maybe are heightened from a regular game, week two against a non-conference opponent versus such a big game where so much on the line for you personally?
Well, I think, you got to have the same week of preparation you always have. I think routine really matters, but I don't think there's anything wrong. Personally, like I've never felt that there's anything wrong with kind of riding that wave of emotion. It can be really powerful, right? Like to have that adrenaline and have that emotion, um, and if you prepare appropriately and you kind of keep to your routine, usually you're able to kind of channel it the right way. It's oftentimes when you do things that are maybe not your typical, say day or week or process, that it feels like maybe you quote unquote do too much or you're not doing it like you did before. So I think the emotion's important and valuable, but then just being able to have that consistent, system for how you execute during the week and on game day and ultimately in the game.
Last question for you. What do the Cougs need to do to get a win, to get bowl eligibility, and extend this season for another month or so?
Score 21 points. Score 21 points, you're winning the football game.
Perfectly said. And hopefully the Cougs score 21 or maybe even more this
Mhm.
Saturday at Giesa Field in Pullman as they take on Oregon State, closing out the regular season and the last season before the last regular season, I should say, before the new Pac-12 starts, and that's going to be interesting. So, Alex, thanks again for all your insight. Always good to be talking to you, and hopefully we're talking in the future about a Cougar Bowl appearance.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Go Cougs.